Welcome, everyone. I appreciate you being here this afternoon, and thank you so much for inviting me to participate in this lecture series and the first of our year of Pathways and Detours. When Diane Scrofano, Professor Diane Scrofano, asked me if I would participate in this, she said to me that the reason why she was interested in me doing this is that she knows that I was an international student when I first came to this country. I have had various careers over the course of my life, but most of it in higher education. And she thought that it would be an opportunity for me to share my journey and my path with you. And so that was exciting. I thought that that's something I would like to do. I think as I was thinking through this presentation, I was thinking that we would have faculty and staff and some administrators in the room, and the title when I was thinking this up was A Road to Success, and the subtitle really being about making a meaningful life in higher education. And I realized that one of the challenges I've always had as an individual is to sort of try and figure out be one thing, right? That you always sort of someone said that there's this sort of multi-part personality where you have all these elements to who you are, and that became sort of, as I was crafting this presentation, I thought, okay, so do I want to talk to the students, because I knew the majority of the audience would be students, about my experiences as an international student, my experience as a graduate student, and my experience as a faculty member and then a dean, and now as the vice president of this institution. Or do I want to talk to everyone about making a meaningful life in education? And I kept coming back to really the whole idea of success, what makes success. And so I will sort of attempt, and hopefully I do it well enough, to sort of talk to all of you present in some way, using my life experience, using my life story, to touch upon what I think are the values that inform a successful life. So that's kind of where the journey will go. I will sort of intersperse between sort of talking about my professional life and reading from some of my own poems. So you sort of get a sense of both of those. And I will sort of expect audience participation. So I'm going to sort of throw some things out and sort of ask you to share. And at the end, there will be time for floor questions if you have them. So I start off by kind of reading you a poem I wrote a few years back about why I write poems. So that gives you a sense of sort of, me as a poet. I believe. A poem exists between love and death. A poem is oatmeal, no jollof rice with fried plantains and neck bones. I want to write poems sturdy and shameless like weeds. I write poems because it is the only way I can calculate the cosine of an angle. I write poems because they ask questions of the ancestors. A poem is a famished road between a whisper and a shout. A poem knows my name even if my mother forgets it. It talks to no one, but everyone listens. To write, I must forget my name at the door. To write, I must embrace the dust bunnies and cluttered hallways of my childhood. A poem does not tell time correctly. A poem is waiting at the street corner for a sandwich and a bag of new clothes. A poem sifts my tears and gives them back without salt. I write because I am hungry. I write because I will die to the world of song. I write because I believe. And I think this poem, even though it is about writing, right, I think it's a little about life. But I also, as I was thinking through, it's really a poem about teaching and learning. It's really a poem about learning, what you learn in a lived life or in a life period. So I'm going to start off by asking a couple of questions of you. So, past this prologue, right? That saying. So what I'd like you to think just take a few minutes and think of the best teacher or teachers you have had, what makes them so? So just think of adjectives or descriptors that help you or that come to mind when you think of the best teacher or teachers that you've had. Okay? You have some ideas? Okay. The next question, so you save that because we'll come back to it at the end. The next question is, what do you want to be when you grow up? And that's a question for everybody. What do you want to be when you grow up? Okay. So hold those two questions in your thoughts, in your head, in your heart, wherever, and as we go through the day. So I'm originally from Nigeria, West Africa. Nigeria is on the coast of the Atlantic in Nigeria. Nigeria received its independence in 1960. So my generation of Nigerians were kind of the first people who were actually born to be Nigerians. Prior to that, we were British subjects. So Nigeria was a British colony until October 1st, 1960. And like folks who were born at that point in time in my birth nation's history, there was a lot of expectation. And if you know anything about the Pan-Africanist movement or anything about Pan-Africanism, or even just the idea of that informed a lot of the movements in the 1960s, was this emphasis on discovering the individual and in discovering the soul of the African, right? I mean, if you read a lot about the time frame, the conversation is always about what makes an African, right? And I was born into that conversation. And when we say, past is prologue, I think it's really important to know that that conversation shaped my life. My parents were in the first generation of individuals who received a university education. My parents, both of them, actually received a university education in Britain, so that's where I was born. So I was an African that was born in Britain, so I'm British. I have a British passport. I also have a Nigerian passport. And I have lived in America for my whole adult life now, since I was 18. And so I have these three identities that are working simultaneously. But that history, that hope of the folks who sought independence from Britain relies in me and is in me. And I am expected, right, by my family and by my country to reflect that. That is the birth of that expectation. Again, I am an immigrant to the US. I came here when I was shortly after my 18th birthday. Prior to that, I lived in Britain for 2 years. And so I come with that experience base as well. And what is important for you to understand is that for someone to live their homeland, where they come from, whether they're doing it under duress or pressure, or they make an active choice, and I was one of those who made an active choice, to come to another country and to live there and to make a life there, there is a decision that you make, and that decision often comes from a place where you need to demonstrate or prove something. That decision often comes from a place where you have to contend with the history you bring as it faces a culture that is often not your own. And in contending with those two cultures, those two systems, or multiple cultures and systems, there is a degree of dissonance, or a degree of, and for lack of a better word, chaos in you, because you're trying to figure out who you are in that context. I was, as a young student and as a young person, rather shy, and in a lot of ways I still am. And so I was that kid, if you went to my elementary school, I was that kid who was playing by himself. I was that kid who was kind of walking around the building or the field. And so I've always kind of lived in my head and in my heart, in my person. I'm not extremely extroverted. I'm actually not extroverted at all, but I have to push myself to do that. So immigrant, introvert, right? And what is also equally important is that I came to the US to go to school. I came to the US to go to USC. And when I came to the US, I came with the understanding that I was going to attend a university. I really didn't have any specific notion of a career path. I did not have any specific notion of a discipline I was going to pursue. My parents were very insistent that whatever I do needed to be able to make me self-sufficient and self-sustaining, and that I needed to be able to come back home and support the family business. So that was kind of all they gave me. They didn't say, you'll be this or you'll be that. And so I came and I was very much almost programmed that I would go get a business degree, which is what I did. I applied to USC to be a business major, and I, started pursuing that. And by the first week of my first semester at USC, I realized that something was wrong. I realized that I really needed more meaning or purpose. I didn't use those words, and I didn't know those words at the time, as that was what I was going through, but I just felt like there was something wrong. So the first semester, I was taking my GEs, and as it would happen, I chose GEs that were in the humanities, because I felt most comfortable. I'd written poetry as a kid, I'd written short stories as a kid, I'd been in the drama club at my high school. So I was, attracted to the performing arts. And I started taking these classes, and I realized very quickly that I was doing pretty well in the classes in the humanities, in my English class, in my history class, in my drama class, and that I wasn't doing well in my math class, and I wasn't doing really well in the business classes. And I knew I couldn't tell my parents this, right? That, I wasn't doing as well in those classes. So I decided that I would just start exploring and taking classes in English, even though I was a business major. And so I started building up courses in English. And to the point where one of the faculty members sort of said to me, you've taken enough classes in English, you should start taking these levels, these 300 level classes, and this was my sophomore year. And you probably will enjoy it. So he recommended I take a poetry class. And to be quite honest, I didn't realize that it was going to be a poetry writing class. I thought it was going to be a poetry reading class. Because I love to read poems, I thought, I would just sit there and read poems. Well, the first day here was an assignment, and asked us to, I think it said, sort of imagine the best day of your life or something. So we had to start writing about this. And the minute I started writing in that class, I discovered another person. I discovered another aspect of me. And so I started throwing all of my energy into a class, writing poetry and being in the English department. And I was taking 1 or 2 business classes. And over the course of my time at USC, I actually double majored. And if you look at my transcripts, you will see all the A's and all the B's in my English classes. I also see some B's and some C's in my business classes. And I tell you this because what I knew at that point in time was that I really, even though I loved to learn, I had no call to a pathway or vocation. I did not. And if somebody hadn't really sort of sat with me, an advisor hadn't sat with me, I would have been undeclared through my junior year. I was just sort of taking classes because I loved to. And so there is a part of me whenever folks talk about, exploring and taking classes at the college, that I understand that. I fully understand that because it's how I came to my passion, right? But I also understand that if I had just gone ahead and taken classes, at random, which I did and continue to do that there would have been a challenge because I would not have been able to complete my degree. So I finished up at USC, and I have a bachelor's degree in business finance, which I've never used, and I have a bachelor's degree in creative writing poetry. And my second to last semester, I was studying with a poet who said to me, you're really good. And he said, you should apply to the program at Arizona State University. And I said, oh, okay. Gather your poems, and we gathered the poems and we sent them. And I really was just thinking, okay, this is the next step. I go get a graduate degree. You get an undergraduate degree and then you get a graduate degree. And I never thought of it as, I would become a faculty member. I never thought about it that I would even write poetry for a living. Because I knew my parents had told me you couldn't write poetry for a living. There's nothing to be done, that you could just do it for fun. So I applied to Arizona State University, and I got into the program. And one of the options to fund that, because my parents were not going to pay for me to get an MFA. So one of the ways in which I would fund that is to be a teaching assistant. And I applied, and I got a teaching assistantship. And I taught predominantly freshman composition or first-year writing classes. And I think every third semester, they chose graduate students to teach a creative writing class, and I got to teach a creative writing class during my time there. Actually, I think I got to teach 2. And I began to learn how to teach reading and writing. And I had no formal training in teaching reading and writing. And even as a graduate student, I realized very quickly the deficiencies in my ability to teach. And so I always say the students who had me my very first semester of teaching in 1990, I should give them their money back because I really didn't know what I was doing. I knew that I knew how to write, and it came to me instinctively. And I knew that I could help somebody do it, but I did not have the nuances. I did not have the competency to teach someone how to write. And that I picked up as I went along. But so I was at Arizona, so I was a graduate student. I was writing poems, publishing poems, and also getting this MFA degree. And as it came close to the end of my time at the university, it became very clear to me that I had to make a choice. One, because I was on a student visa, and at some point I would need to go home or continue my education. And I really wasn't looking to get a PhD at that point in time. So I applied for my practical training, my visa, so I could stay for another year to sort of learn my skill or my craft. And when I did that, the practical training visa came because I got a job in a PR firm. And while I was at USC, I'd interned for 2 summers as a PR firm in Santa Monica. So I was beginning to help write press releases and beginning to help write spec statements for organizations. I was writing travel pieces for publications, the Westin and other hotels and hospitality vehicles. And as I was doing that, I began to see how I could apply what I've learned in writing creatively into what one would call a technical writing context. And so I sort of picked up that skill set as well as I was doing that. And I was still writing poems, but now my job was to write so that I could sell the weekend package at the Hyatt in Honolulu, because that's what I was doing. I was writing that. Or I was writing a piece that would go into one of those local, like in Newsweekly, the local publications, about a band that would be somewhere in LA. But what I began to do was take my skill sets from writing, right, that I did for fun, and applying it into a technical or professional context. The reason I tell you this is because if anyone had told me when I was a freshman in college, even when I was a high school student, that I would end up writing, for publications and selling, the weekends in the Hyatt, or that I would end up at some point being a dean at a college, or had told me that I would end up being a vice president of instruction at the college, I would have said no way, because I hadn't thought of that. That wasn't my pathway. That wasn't what I was thinking. I was just taking classes for taking classes' sake. This is important because one of the things I would hope to communicate to you, or one of the values I would want to communicate to you, is you're being open to whatever comes to you or comes at you. That openness, that ability to want to take in what comes at you and then making something of it, is part of what I think is responsible for my own success. So I asked you about the teachers you had in the past, right? Could you tell me a quality or a descriptor of a very good teacher you've had in the past? Anybody? Yes. Right. So they have an investment in you in some way. Okay. What else? Yes. The observant of their students. Okay. So they know what their strengths are. They know what their challenges are. They may know something about that student's personal life. Right. Okay. Yes. They want to teach. Right. How do you know they want to teach? What tells you that they know they want to teach? Or
They're young at heart.
They're young at heart, okay. And by young at heart, you mean they are relatable? They connect with the students, okay. So what you're alluding to, what you've identified, is that they sort of model for you a way of being, right? That some of the best teachers model for you a way of being, that they inspire you, right? That they love what they do, that they find passion in what they do, right? And one of the things that you realize is that not just mastering competency, right? They're not just talking to you about mastering competency, but they're talking to you about making something, being productive, applying, right? Being creative, being innovative. And I think what is important for us to remember as faculty members and as administrators is that we often have to meet the students where they're at. That they bring a complex set of stories to the classroom. They bring a complex set of stories to the engagement, the learning engagement. That once we're able to figure out what is relevant, what is valuable to that student, that we as the faculty member, that we as the administrator are able to then tap into that motivation, and that student is then able to sort of grow in that context, or in our context. So what is fascinating to me is that when I think of the best teachers that I had, they basically helped me understand that I had some innate worth and value, and that I had some knowledge that I could share with others. The teacher that said to me, "You're really good at this, keep doing it." The teacher that said to me, "You should apply to that graduate program because you're good at it." The teacher that said to me, "I'm seeing that you're struggling with this. This is how you can help work around that struggle." That individual inspires me, or inspired me, so that I could sort of transcend my own doubts, my own questions about myself. That's important when we talk about making meaning of a life. A colleague of mine and I shared an office at the college where I worked in Connecticut. And on the occasion of his retirement, they had asked me, I was here, and they had asked me if I would write something. So I decided to write a poem about David. David Hopcroft was the instructor's name. And he taught communication, and he and I shared an office for about a year and a half at the institution. And what I want you to sort of listen to in this poem is the way in which the person encourages learning. Learners first for David. This love of words and gestures, this love of the world of knowing, is like a trip to a foreign country. You start out packing the right suspenders, socks, and an encyclopedia of the country's temperament. Something in case the water does not agree with you. The postcards prepare you well, or so you think. Then the ambitions give way to the lived stories. Enter stage left, the housewife with the fear of public speaking, her very breath stolen from her by the possibilities. Center stage, the returning warrior whose stories are bustling to be unleashed. The world that gives us speech takes it away from us with one stroke of the pen, slash of the word. David, here you are coaching from the sidelines, posture here, phrasing there. The frogs on the pond reminding us that it's time to take off our socks. Jettison the suspenders for khaki and a belt of hemp rope. Organizing the chaos of thought into eloquence requires socks off from spring to early winter. Hoppy, you remind us that this world of knowing is so much about unknowing and unlearning as it is about being prepared. And Hoppy was his nickname. And he was the faculty member who once it was spring, he would no longer wear long pants, he would wear shorts in Connecticut. And he would really sometimes wear flip-flops and no socks. So that's kind of the play on this. This particular poem calls to mind a mantra that I try my very best to live by. And that is about unknowing and unlearning. Because often when we are so rigid in our convictions, when we're so certain in what we know, we often miss so much. And especially in an educational context, and particularly as it relates to students, part of what we want to help our students do is to unlearn, right? You know, I mean, there's this concept of the zone of proximal, zone of proximal intelligence. And the fact that, you know, you want to just push somebody enough that they feel uncomfortable about the learning, but not push them too much that they fall off the wagon and, you know, they get averse to the learning experience. And I think part of our charge, and part of your charge as individuals who are learning, is to seek situations where you will be challenged. To seek situations where what you believe you know is going to be challenged. That's very tough, because often it is easy for us to live in our comfort zone, right? That's very tough because often we're creatures of habit and we want comfort and we want routine. And what my career in higher education has told me or taught me is that once I become complacent, I lose that innovative or creative streak that makes me effective. I'll give you an example. My first semester teaching, I was teaching a writing course, a composition course. And at the time, I had a dean who met with each of the new faculty members. It was a small college. There was 6 of us that were new that year. And she would meet with each one of us for an hour a week. So we would sit with her and we would talk with her. And this is something I learned that I did as a dean here. And so I sat with her, and it was one of those days that it's just been a really tough day. And I went into her office and I said, you know, this is just crazy. These students don't want to learn. They don't have the skill sets. And everything that was wrong with the students, I was just pouring out, you know, and dumping at her. And she was just looking at me like, okay. And remember, I was 26 years old, you know, when I got my first full-time teaching job. So I'm dumping all of this stuff at her. And so she listens to me. And then she says to me, she's like, you know, you write poetry? I'm like, yeah. She's like, so what do you do when you're struggling with a poem that it doesn't make sense? And I said, well, I just, you know, I sort of lived with the idea for a while, and then I started looking for ways in which I can try and make it make sense, and I just keep writing and rewriting and revising and all of that. And she said, oh, okay. She's like, so have you communicated that to your students? I said, what do you mean, have I communicated that? She's like, well, have you talked to your students about your writing process? I'm like, no. I'm like, that's creative writing. I'm teaching freshman composition. I'm teaching them how to put essays and argument papers together. And she says, okay. She's like, so let's put that aside for a second. She's like, when you are in math class, because she knew I had a math phobia. And she says, when you're in math class, she's like, how do you handle when you don't get the content? I was like, well, that's most of the time in math class for me. She's like, so how did you handle it? What did you do? So I said, well, I often just sort of gave up. And she says, so you gave up? I said, yeah. I said, or else I'd find somebody to work with and we'll figure it out. But she's like, but you never fully really learned what you needed. And I'm like, no, I just got through the test. She says, okay, so think about the students you're working with. Who do you want them to be? Do you want them to be that person who just does it so they can get through your class and move on to the next one? Or do you want them to be that person whom you can model for them how to struggle through dealing with complexities and difficulties? Do you want them to be that person who is able to sort of look at a challenge and find alternatives to ways of addressing that challenge? And then she asked me a really concrete question about my teaching. She said to me, so this is and I think I had taught part-time for 2 years before then. She says, so this is your first full-time teaching position. She's like, at the end of your career, what would you want students to say about you? So she made me do this exercise where I wrote down the things I would want students to say about me, you know, 50 years or whatever, how long I thought it was going to take me to get there. And I think that by asking me those critical questions, my dean, in a sense, was not only mentoring me and molding me, but she was helping me to connect to what I find important and significant in the learning process, which is that there needs to be some investment, which is that there's some fear and some anxiety with learning, and that it is normal, and to be able to sort of face that and provide people a context to address that and deal with it in a way that allows them worth, and in a way that allows them to then learn from their mistakes. And so for me, one of the things that I've learned over time is the importance of being able to identify how we engage folks in dialogue around learning. One of the reasons I moved from being a faculty member to being an administrator is that I started out with the understanding that I have this 25 students, or at that time 30 students in each of my writing classes, and I taught one literature class that would have about 50 students. And that, at any given semester I had between 150 and 200 students. And that I wanted to be the best faculty member for those 200 students. And then I became department chair and took on all of those responsibilities. And my goal was to help all of those faculty members who were colleagues, but whom I was also responsible for supporting and supervising in some way, that they become the best faculty members they could be. And as I moved on and went from being a department chair to being a coordinator at the college where I worked, I became invested in helping people in professional development. So I helped to develop workshops and programs. And what I realized as I was doing that is that in my class or in any given semester, I had the ability to impact, influence, support 200 students. But that as the coordinator for professional development for that college, I think we had, 19 or 20 faculty members who were full-time, everybody else was adjunct. And that I had those 20 people whom I was working with on an ongoing basis, and that I had the potential to make them successful. And so the reason why I left the classroom to become a manager was I thought at that time that I would have the opportunity to work with faculty and help them become the best faculty members they can become. And at my heart and in the center of what motivates me as an administrator is that creating that opportunity, creating that environment where I can support faculty as they struggle with things I struggled with my first semester in teaching, that is what an administrator does. That is our job. It's a service to the faculty member who in turn supports and motivates the student. So it's a service to our students, and that's how I have value. So what I'm hoping I'm talking to you about or getting to is this need for adaptability, right? Be what you need to be when you need to. As a student, as a faculty member, as a staff member, be what you need to be when you need to. So how do you know that you're what you need to be when you need to? Which questions come up? Often, the challenge of being an administrator, for me, is not about doing the right thing. Because I think my intention is to do the right thing always. The intention is to know what others think is the right thing, and then how I am involved in that process of having to bring the dialogue, bringing the conversations together so that we can reach some consensus, we can reach some understanding. And sometimes you will not reach consensus, but trying to reach mutual understanding, trying to engage in that dialogue itself, I think is key. So, one of the things that people say about me, and one of the things I like about me, is my ability to sort of take diverse and disparate information and put it together. I think one of the key skills we need in life is synthesis. How do we go about synthesizing knowledge? Not only as students, but as administrators and as faculty members and as staff. We need to embrace curiosity. What my manager was telling me when I was dumping on all of those students is to find a way to make those students curious about their learning, to find a way to engage those students in their learning. That's what she was telling me. She was saying, you struggle through this, right? How did you get through it? Figure it out for your students. Help them find that place, right? And she was also saying to me, find intersections or connections between disparate things. This is what you did when you were writing poetry. This is what you could do when you're teaching, right? Finding where those connections are, even though they may not be as explicit. What is important when you embrace intersections is that you end up really negating or abandoning this kind of dualistic way of seeing the world, which is really key in the world that we live in, right? And we're not red state, we're not blue state, you're not liberal or conservative, that we're trying to find some way to transcend those barriers. I'm going to play for you a TED Talk.
have spent my entire life either at the schoolhouse, on the way to the schoolhouse, or talking about what happens in the schoolhouse. Both my parents were educators. My maternal grandparents were educators. And for the past 40 years, I've done the same thing. And so needless to say, over those years, I've had a chance to look at education reform from a lot of perspectives. Some of those reforms have been good. Some of them have been not so good. And we know why kids drop out. We know why kids don't learn. It's either poverty, low attendance, negative peer influences. We know why. But one of the things that we never discuss, or we rarely discuss, is the value and importance of human connection. Relationship. James Comer says that no significant learning can occur without a significant relationship. George Washington Carver says all learning is understanding relationship. Everyone in this room has been affected by a teacher or an adult. For years, I have watched people teach. I have looked at the best and I've looked at some of the worst. A colleague said to me one time, they don't pay me to like the kids. They pay me to teach a lesson. The kids should learn it. I should teach it. They should learn it. Case closed. Well, I said to her, you know, kids don't learn from people they don't like. She said, that's just a bunch of hooey. And I said to her, well, your year is going to be long and arduous, dear. Needless to say, it was. Some people think that you can either have it in you to build a relationship or you don't. I think Stephen Covey had the right idea. He said you ought to just throw in a few simple things, like seeking first to understand as opposed to being understood. Simple things like apologizing. You ever thought about that? Tell a kid you're sorry, they're in shock. I taught a lesson once on ratios. I'm not real good with math, but I was working on it. And I got back and looked at that teacher edition. I taught the whole lesson wrong. So I came back to class the next day and I said, look, guys, I need to apologize. I taught the whole lesson wrong. I'm so sorry. They said, that's okay, Miss Pearson. You were so excited. We just let you go. I have had classes that were so low, so academically deficient that I cried. I wondered, how am I going to take this group in 9 months from where they are to where they need to be? And it was difficult. It was awfully hard. How do I raise the self-esteem of a child and his academic achievement at the same time? One year I came up with a bright idea. I told all my students, you were chosen to be in my class. Because I am the best teacher and you are the best students, they put us all together so we could show everybody else how to do it. One of the students said, really? I said, really? We have to show the other classes how to do it. So when we walk down the hall, people will notice us. So you can't make noise, you just have to strut. And I gave him a saying to say, I am somebody. I was somebody when I came. I'll be a better somebody when I leave. I am powerful and I am strong. I deserve the education that I get here. I have things to do, people to impress, and places to go. And they said, yeah. You say it long enough, it starts to be a part of you. And so I gave a quiz, 20 questions. Student missed 18. I put a +2 on this paper and a big smiley face. He said, Miss Pearson, is this an F? I said, yes. He said, then why'd you put a smiley face? I said, because you on the roll. You got 2 right, you didn't miss them all. I said, and when we review this, won't you do better? He said, yes, ma'am, I can do better. You see, -18 sucks all the life out of you. +2 said, I ain't all bad. 4 years, I watched my mother take the time at recess to review, go on home visits in the afternoon, buy combs and brushes and peanut butter and crackers to put in her desk drawer for kids that needed to eat, and a washcloth and some soap for the kids who didn't smell so good. See, it's hard to teach kids who stink. And kids can be cruel. And so she kept those things in her desk, and years later, after she retired, I watched some of those same kids come through and say to her, you know, Miss Walker, you made a difference in my life. You made it work for me. You made me feel like I was somebody when I knew at the bottom I wasn't. And I want you to just see what I've become. And when my mama died 2 years ago at 92, there were so many former students at her funeral. It brought tears to my eyes, not because she was gone, but because she left a legacy of relationships that could never disappear. Can we stand to have more relationships? Absolutely. Will you like all your children? Of course not. And you know your toughest kids are never absent. Never. You won't like them all, and the tough ones show up for a reason. It's the connection. It's the relationships. And while you won't like them all, the key is they can never, ever know it. So teachers become great actors and great actresses, and we come to work when we don't feel like it, and we listen to policy that doesn't make sense, and we teach anyway. We teach anyway because that's what we do. Teaching and learning should bring joy. How powerful would our world be if we had kids who were not afraid to take risks, who were not afraid to think, and who had a champion? Every child deserves a champion, an adult who will never give up on them, who understands the power of connection and insists that they become the best that they can possibly be. Is this job tough? You betcha. Oh, God, you betcha. But it is not impossible. We can do this. We're educators. We're born to make a difference. Thank you so much.
Okay, so the reason why I sort of integrated this TED Talk into my presentation is that the power of human connection and relationship building, I think, is the most significant virtue and value in the learning experience. One must feel connected to what one is learning. One must feel part of a learning community, part of a series of a community of individuals who are invested to investigate in knowledge. And if one doesn't feel that, it is less likely that they will fully integrate that into their being and so doing understand just beyond the notion of rote learning, but to come to a place where you can integrate that into your own practice, you can integrate that into your way of being, and then you can make something of it. The point that she makes about children or students that are challenging it is a very important one. This is one of the things that I've learned. You know, you learn some things in your professional life that impact your personal life. And one of the joys of my working at this college is that we have superb professionals, faculty and staff and administrators who are really about what's best for students. And when I think of my opportunities at sitting in classes at this college, observing folks, I learned from the math faculty the whole notion of board work, you know, and how you sort of put this logic on the board. I learned from the folks in the performing arts and in the visual arts how you build relationships to creativity. So that when I want to talk to somebody about how you engage students and making sure that those students they love who they are and see who they are through the work that they produce, I can look at those faculty members. Having been a faculty member in the humanities and having had the opportunity of being a dean here, one of the things I find that explains why we're the best community college, period, is that folks at this college realize that those students have lives beyond the classroom. And their goal is to help those students be successful. I discovered this as the father of a child with a learning disability. And being who I am, and I'm really about accomplishments and achievements, and what I discovered is that as a father of a child with a learning disability, that I needed to learn to cede control. And I needed to figure out, like I did with like I had to do with my students that first semester, how to make learning fun for my child. And it's a struggle, but it is one of the reasons why when I am talking to a faculty member, when I'm talking with my colleagues about what is important in what we do, I always say to myself, how would my child, how would Michael do in this context? Because if I can see Michael in all the students, if I can see Michael in all the people I work with, then I realize that it is not about the faculty-administrator relationship, it is not about the student-faculty relationship, that it is about those things that bind us together, and it's the human connection. That human connection says that we start from a place of learning to make meaning in community and through dialogue. I think this world needs that more than ever now. I think that this society needs that more than ever now. And I think it is so important for us to be able to see the other in ourselves. Thank you so much for joining me and participating this afternoon. If you have questions, please feel free to ask.